Nida Khan, a journalist in New York. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining me.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Nida, did you just hear our discussion here? A little bit, at least
yes,
the last...
Yes, I caught the tail end of it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. At least the last sentences. Do you think that the Obama administration is doing its best to not bring on the table the Islamist radicalization that we are seeing or experiencing a lot around the world?
I think the president actually, who just spoke a short time ago, gave a very measured response in terms of saying that this could have very well been a terrorist-related attack or it could have been workplace-related, but we don't know just as of yet. And the FBI just concluded a press conference along with the chief of police in San Bernardino, reiterating the same thing, that it would be premature and irresponsible to come out and speculate and say this was definitively terrorist-related. Now, could it very well have been? Absolutely. The investigation is going through right now, and we'll find out once this stuff comes out. But I think the jumping on the bandwagon immediately once it's a person who has a Muslim name, or as a lot of media outlets here went with yesterday, saying that it has a foreign-sounding name and automatically classifying it as terrorism, is very dangerous because it feeds into that narrative that only Muslims are the ones who commit acts of terrorism, and not when it's, let's say, a white male shooter.
Yeah, Nida, you know, we're talking, and we brought up again the issue of Islamophobia in Europe after the Paris shooting attacks. Muslims in the United States do feel that after September 11, or especially after all the attacks, all the terror attacks that we're seeing that are being perpetrated by ISIS?
Absolutely. You see, and not only after September 11th, even now, because there's so much ratcheting up of this anti-Muslim rhetoric after the Paris attacks, even here in the U.S., you have people like Donald Trump, Ben Carson, just spewing all this kinds of anti-Muslim hysteria and phobia. And you've seen a rise in attacks against Muslims. Even on Thanksgiving Day, there was a cab driver who was shot after a passenger asked him questions about whether or not he was Muslim, where he was from, just, you know, and mosques being attacked around the country and Qurans being thrown and people just kind of watching their back. And then every time you have an incident like this, unfortunately, all Muslims are collectively required to denounce it and take some sort of, you know, make some sort of response because of it. Whereas when you have like the Planned Parenthood shooting that happened last week in Colorado, and it was a white male Christian who could have very well been motivated by his views on abortion, you don't see white males being required to denounce it or every single Christian being required to denounce it. So it's very hypocritical, and it just creates a very toxic and disturbing environment.
Yeah, but you know what I'm asking, and let me be the devil advocate here, is that, you know, some people will say, you know, look what is happening around the world, and maybe being politically correct here, this is what is making these events or these things to happen. Maybe we should call it as it is and stop looking for other explanations to this.
I think it absolutely is terrorism, and we should, in fact, I would even call this an act of terrorism, but I also call what the Planned Parenthood shooter, Deer, his last name is Deer, what he did, also an act of terrorism. And I think that's where the problem lies, is that we just selectively use it. When violence is perpetrated by other people or other backgrounds, we don't use the same verbiage, and therein lies the problem. Are there Muslims that commit acts of terrorism? Absolutely. Are there Christians who commit acts of terrorism? Absolutely. Are there Jewish people who commit acts of terrorism? Absolutely. But it lies in the verbiage and when things are juxtaposed with terrorism, and who's deemed a terrorist and who's not. And I think that's fundamentally where the problem comes into.
Yes, of course, Nida Khan, thank you very much for this conversation with us.